A sunburned man found a lump on his arm. This is what happened to his brain. Casey is a 45-year-old man, presenting to the emergency room with a 15-minute seizure. His wife, Jennifer, tells the admitting nurse at admission that he had been developing a weakness on the left side of his body over the last few days. You see, Casey was a farmer in rural Middle America. Every year, he was sunburned for at least 3 months from working out in the fields. Didn't really care about anything for his health because he'd been okay his whole life. Several months ago, a sunburned Casey found an asymmetrical, pigmented lesion with irregular borders growing rapidly on the skin of his right arm. Day after day, the lump would seem to morph into something new, grow larger, and ulcerated but without pain. He thought it might be cancer. A doctor's visit was unnecessary, he thought. Most of his farmer's life was fixing things on his own. Whether it was parts of his home or his farm equipment, he lived a self-sufficient life. He always had the tools to get the job done, and in the case of his skin cancer, this is something he could fix himself. Immediately after removing his own skin tumor, Casey thought that this story was over. Nothing more to be done here. Wrap it up with a cloth and carry on, he thought. Over the next few months Casey felt great, but noticed there was a lump growing inside his right armpit underneath the skin. It was warm to the touch. Sometimes he could feel a pulsating sensation coming from it. Every morning he'd wake up and put his hand on the lump, and feel his heart beat through it. His wife suggested he see a physician, but Casey joked to his wife that he's his own surgeon now. He said he did it once, and if he has to do it for the lump in his right armpit, he'll do it again. Except, a PET scan revealed hypermetabolic lymph nodes in that region. Hyper meaning high, metabolic referring to cellular division, and lymph nodes denoting the structures in your body where white blood cells from your immune system accumulate and drain. These kinds of lymph nodes indicate that something is growing inside his right armpit. About a month ago, Jennifer started to notice Casey developing irregularities in his walk. It appeared to look like a limp that when confronted about it, Casey would deny anything. He actually couldn't see himself deteriorating. He started to develop a weakness on his left side and began developing headaches that were so bad he'd feel as if someone were pushing from inside his skull against his eyes. His entire family began to notice changes in his personality. A normally patient and down-to-earth man, he would now get physically angry at everything until one day while working out in the fields, he suddenly collapsed on a 15-minute seizure. An MRI finds multiple lesions developing in several regions of Casey's brain. Because there's no indication of infection, cerebral bleeding and signs of radiation damage to his brain, and because these tumors don't have the characteristics of a primary tumor, it means that Casey doesn't have brain cancer, but that there's tumors in his brain that are from cancers elsewhere in his body and they've spread to his brain. Cells from his axillary mass lymph nodes were examined. It wasn't just a swollen red lump, it was widespread cancer growth. Looking at the cells under a microscope, multiple markers were positive for a type of skin cancer based on presence of the polymer that gives tissue color and pigmentation, something called melanin. Even though Casey had removed the cancer from the skin of his right arm, it appears that the cells from that primary tumor are now growing en masse in his lymph nodes and in his brain. We can conclude here that Casey has metastatic melanoma, melan referring to melanin, oma meaning tumor or irregular mass, describing the type of cancer growing on Casey, and metastatic meaning that even though he originally had cut out the cancer himself, it has transcended its stationary site of origin and has started spreading throughout his body. If in a healthy person you wouldn't normally find skin cells growing in the brain, then how is it possible that Casey's skin cancer spread to his brain? Well, there's a bit of basic cellular biology to be known here. Cancer is a genetic disease at its core, but its physical characteristics are something more. The genes in our body code for proteins, which give us our physical form, but they also signal for our cells to do things. Proteins are made of amino acids. Amino acids are sequenced together, dictated by our genetic sequence. Changing that sequence, either by mistake or from environmental damage like from radiation from the sun, cause mutations. But most mutations are nonsense, happen less than 0.01% of the time and usually get fixed. But sometimes, these mutations create proteins that signal to the cell to grow, and there's no signal to stop growing, to keep reproducing with no signal to stop reproducing, to grow their own blood supply, and to survive in the circulation and spread to other distant sites of the body. Cancer is more than just a genetic disease, it's an evolutionary step to highly successful cellular survival, at the expense of its host. Casey's case gives us more evidence of this. A genetic test is done on his lymph node cancer cells. A single-point mutation was found specifically on chromosome 7, on the gene named BIF, at nucleotide 1799, where there should have been an A, there was a T, meaning for the protein made by the gene BRAF, one amino acid at position 600 changed, creating something called the V600E mutation. A normal functioning cell uses RAF, which feeds into a pathway of the cell causing it to grow, with limitations, but BRAF V600E promotes unmitigated cellular growth and uninhibited cellular division, which gives us a necessary condition for it to be cancer. But there's more. When you pee, some urethral cells will be in that pee. Physics tells us for any flowing fluid, a shear stress will be produced along the surface on which it flows. For biological systems, it means some of the cells can come off when you urinate, but cells can also come off when blood flows into a tissue. As melanomas grow thicker and deeper into the skin, the chance of metastasis becomes higher and higher. We call this high-risk disease because then melanoma cells can break off from the primary tumor and float around in the blood. The blood vessels going into the brain have a special biology, called the blood-brain barrier. It prevents certain substances from going in, and allows others in. This blood-brain barrier has proteins on its surface. Melanoma cells also have an overexpression of proteins on its surface, meaning if a skin cancer cell can break off from the tumor, live in the blood circulation, when it gets to vasculature of the brain, it can adhere onto the proteins at the blood-brain barrier and begin to grow and multiply, forming a brain metastasis. Melanomas are the third most common cancer to spread to the brain. Breast and lung cancers have a higher incidence of brain metastasis, but data shows that 40 to 50% of patients who have a melanoma that spread somewhere in the body will eventually have it spread to the brain. The massive headaches, the paralysis on one side of his body, the 15-minute seizure. If this continues unchecked, the brain masses growing inside Casey will eventually rupture the blood vessels in the brain, causing fatal damage through the cerebral cortex. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun is known to cause cellular damage. Because the sun doesn't shine directly on Casey's brain, nor his lymph nodes, but it shines on his skin, and skin cancer is known to spread to the brain and lymph nodes, we know where these tumors originated from. Case reports of people who for years worked in an environment where the sun shined on one half of their face revealed the extent of damage possible to skin tissue. Queensland, Australia, where the UV index is often high, and people with light-colored skin who are not genetically adapted to the harsh sun contribute to the melanoma capital of the world with an incidence rate of 71 cases per 100,000 people, 3 times that of the United States. The metastatic propensity of malignant primary tumors is a recurring theme when it comes to causes of mortality in cancer. Colorectal and stomach cancers commonly spread to the liver first as the shared blood supply make it one of the first organs of contact. Bone cancers typically go to the lungs first. Breast cancers commonly spread to the lungs, liver, bones, and brain, and lung cancers typically to go the brain first as blood passes through the lungs to be oxygenated, pick up cancer cells as the fluid produces a shear stress along its interface, enter into the left ventricle, into the aorta, into the carotid arteries to the brain. And uveal melanoma, a cancer of the melanocytes in the eyes, which is a different kind of melanoma than the skin, typically spread to the liver first, despite the eyes being right next to the brain. For KC, removing his own primary tumor meant very little, because at some point either before or after he removed it, the cancer had already started to spread all throughout the body. There's a few things that can be done, but the prognosis, or the predicted outcome of his disease at this late stage is grave. Once melanoma has metastasized to the brain and produced symptoms like a 15-minute seizure, historic data from multiple studies show that median survival, the time at which 50% of patients are left alive, is less than 5 months. That by 18 months after diagnosis, about 10% of patients are still alive. Throughout any clinician's career, over the many patients one will see, statistically, there will be those few patients who live with stable disease, but those patients are the exception and not the rule. At the time KC was diagnosed in early 2011, multiple treatment modalities were available for KC. Traditional chemotherapies in metastatic melanoma had fallen by the wayside by the time he presented to the emergency room, as they were known to have little to no effect on brain metastases. KC was offered brain surgery in an attempt to prevent more seizures, prevent the tumor from causing a brain bleed, and minimize neurologic dysfunction. He declined and elected for radiation therapy, which irradiates the cells, thereby damaging their DNA sufficiently to prevent them from reproducing, but it appeared that KC presented to the emergency room too late as additional seizures and intracerebral hemorrhage ensued before any treatment was initiated. At autopsy, KC's brain masses were found to have the same V600E mutation as the mass in his right armpit, and because it's not likely that both of those sites each simultaneously and independently mutated the exact same gene, with evidence of melanocytic immunomarkers present, this was a case of advanced melanoma with multiple metastases to the brain. Sunscreen is a must for anyone who spends long periods of time outside. It shields one from the harmful UV radiation from the sun that damages the DNA of skin. Early detection, along with going to a surgical oncologist for consultation instead of removing the skin tumor himself, could have prevented this outcome for KC. Prevention with sunscreen, sitting in the shade, and limiting one's sun exposure during the summer months is still the best approach to one's health in this context. The ancient Chinese had a character for Cancer. It is based off the word for rocks, implying a burden carried by one's body. The character has a formality to indicate illness on the right as it resembles a bed turned sideways, and on the left is a symbol for a primary tumor, spreading throughout the body as multiple smaller metastases that continue to spread to infinity. Treatment modalities in early 2011 when KC presented to the emergency room were better than what ancient humans had. The treatments today improve response rates, progression-free survival, and overall survival, but they can and will be better yet with time. And even after all of these centuries, cancer is still a burden on humanity.